Good morning, beautiful people. Welcome back. Today we are talking about Emily Gilmore. Grab your coffee and let's get started. Like our other Gilmore girls that we've gone through before, we are going to be talking about Emily in 5 different aspects. Emily as a wife, as a mother, as a grandmother, her in the DAR / her as a boss, and then Emily Gilmore in the reboot. With Emily, there's so much that we could go into. I mean, she's one of the, original Gilmore girls, even though she married into Gilmore. You get what I'm saying. But today we are going to start with Emily as a wife. The reason that I decided to start here is because this is pretty much as far back as we know about the character of Emily. We don't really know about either of her parents, necessarily her upbringing, but there are some hints of it when we have the episode where they go back to Yale. Now again, while we don't know exactly Emily's childhood, we know that she's at least smart enough or connected enough to get into Yale. We also know that she knew that Richard was engaged and still wanted to date him, marry him, become the Gilmore in line with that. But she really does love Richard and she really does want to be a Gilmore wife. Now this does go a little bit into Richard's aspects of his character, and maybe we'll have another video about that as well. But it is interesting that Emily does have a little bit of a crossover with Rory in that Emily's mother-in-law, well, Rory doesn't get married to Logan, but you'll get the connection here in a second. That Emily's mother-in-law writes a letter and says she's very nice, but she's not a Gilmore. She can't be part of this family. She doesn't have those type of standards. And actually recently I just rewatched the episode where that happens to Rory with the Huntsbergers, because like he says girlfriend and all of that. So it was really interesting in thinking about Emily as a character, realizing that there are some crossovers for that, which is probably another reason why that makes Emily so mad in like one of her like most mic drop moments.
We are just as good as you are. You don't think Rory is good enough for your son, as if we don't know Logan's reputation? We do. Those kids are staying together for as long as they like. You won't stop them. Now enjoy the event.
That is just like pinnacle Grandma Bear moment. I think that also does come from the fact that Emily has had that in her past. And by that time, Emily has read the letter that basically said a very similar thing. Now, we don't really know this again until the reboot. So I think this is going to be one of those character analysis where it's kind of a lot of flowing back and forth because Emily's character changes some, stays exactly the same in other parts. But we don't really learn until the reboot the impact that Richard has really truthfully had on Emily's life, in that Emily became part of the DAR. She became part of that world, and then in the reboot because there is no more Richard, there's no more reason to be in that world, and she goes and kind of does her own thing from now on. But Emily as a wife wants to have the impact of the Gilmore name, and she knows that that is a very, very important thing, not only to Richard, but also to her as a character of being a Gilmore, having her daughter be a Gilmore, having her granddaughter be a Gilmore, and the weight that name holds not only to her but in the community in large. Emily's not only following Richard because of the Gilmore name, but one of the reasons that Gilmore name does hold the weight that it does for her is because she truly loves Richard. You can see it in his health scare episodes where she's not really sure what's happening or what's going on. You can see that she is starting to cry and is like, no, I go first. Like, you don't get to choose that. I'm choosing it right now and you must be here because I love you and this is our family and this is our marriage and this is our lives. And you can feel that in the episode, that she truly does not want to lose him. I do appreciate the fact that the Gilmores are shown in multiple lights, in their good times and in their bad times. I appreciate that when it comes to the show, we see a lot of the real aspects of the characters, not only the kind of, facade that they're portraying to the world, and it's shown in that sometimes they're having like a wonderful week and sometimes they're really connected and they talk about past times when they've gone on vacations. But then there are the times as well when the couple is not connected and like Richard moves into the pool house because they're having trouble in their marriage, and then we see that they do love each other and they don't want to get divorced. And even in his honestly not very smart way of fender bendering the car, you see that he does love her as well and he does want to be married to her. And even in that episode when she does go on her date, she comes back home and she cries. This is not what she wants to do. She doesn't want to go dating again. She doesn't want to be back out in the dating world. She wants Richard and she wants their lives. Ironically, one of my favorite Richard and Emily moments does coincide with a very poor Emily and Lorelai moment, but it is the reconciliation wedding, mainly how he remembers that moment from their past and brings that throughout, and they have their lovely dance. It's just really nice to see them happy, and it's nice to see them being them again. Now, there's so many other aspects of Emily as a wife that we could dive into. Some of them will kind of be sprinkled throughout because, again, wife and mother, they're in the same household, and then when it comes to the reboot, a lot of that happened because Emily doesn't have Richard anymore. But now we're gonna move on. Emily as a mother. Now, do I understand the minefield I'm about to walk through in this subject? Yes, I do, and please know that I am going to do all that I can to take the aspects of the character that were portrayed to us on screen and just share basically what I saw. I think that we could all agree on the fact that Emily as a mom has a lot of dimensions and a lot of hurt and a lot of flaws, and I do think that with the Gilmore name, she put a lot of weight on Lorelai. I think that Emily did want to be a mom. Now we can figure out the why of that in the comment section if you want, but I don't think Emily really has learned Lorelai. I've heard it said before that one of the best aspects of being a mom is getting to be a student of your child and learning about them as a person and kind of seeing them grow and mature and what that looks like and just the beauty of that. And I don't think Emily has done that very well. Now, there's the obvious depiction of that in that when Lorelai got pregnant, she felt it was so necessary to run away from home. But again, like marriage being a two-way street, I do think a mother-daughter relationship's a two-way street, but I also don't think that Lorelai was raised in the most healthy, loving of environments. Unlike Emily's childhood, we do get to see little bits of Lorelai's childhood. Now, there is a joke about how she burned all of the pictures, but when we have like different pictures of Lorelai, not even like at 16 when she gets pregnant, but younger than that, it's always very proper. Lorelai's always having to be in like a multi-layered fluff dress, and basically like the children are quiet and the children are over there. And it reminds me of like if you were to go to your grandmother's house or something of that nature and you like can't sit on the couch because the couch has like the plastic wrap on it. If you know what I'm saying, you get it. The house of the Gilmores when Lorelai was little really reminds me of that. Honestly, it's almost like the house where if you were laughing and leaving your toys in different places, basically the nanny would be following you around and like picking those up. I don't see Emily and Lorelai connecting when Lorelai was younger, or I really do believe that when Lorelai gets pregnant, even the fact that she drives herself to the hospital to give birth to Rory says something about her relationship with her mother. Looking to the time period of when Lorelai would have been born and raised and all of that, she's kind of in like the rock and roll, I guess, era, and Emily definitely did not grow up in that. If anything, Emily very much so chose to be in a structured environment. So having a daughter that was like making Rory's garments out of old t-shirts, and like we see Lorelai's box. Now, not necessarily would Emily have seen that, but you can see what Lorelai would have been when she was 12 to 15 years old in her sevenness, if you know Enneagram. It would have been very hard for Emily to connect with that, but I think she should have tried a little bit harder. Basically what I'm trying to say is that Emily and Lorelai definitely did not have a warm, fuzzy, connected relationship when Lorelai was a kid like Rory had with Lorelai. And I mean, they honestly as much as say it pretty much in the show, but to me, their childhoods aren't polar opposites, but I do think that Emily could have been a much better mother to Lorelai. I do think there's a real want from Emily to have a relationship with her daughter, but I don't think she knows another way to do it other than honestly like almost like a manipulation of like a tit for tat that she does. And you see that throughout different seasons of the show of if I do this, I need you to do this. And it's not in the healthy way of, hey, I love you, you love me, but almost in the way of like, I'm expecting this of you because I did this for you. I know all this is sounding pretty harsh on Emily, but honestly, that's just what we're seeing in the show. And the actress that plays her even says that in interviews about how Emily is an interesting character, but also a very prickly character. We do see soft sides to Emily and Lorelai's relationship. Like I love the mother-daughter modeling that they do, and that's like a really fun moment. I do also think the vicious trollop, like I talked about in the Lorelai character analysis, I think that's a lovely moment, but a lot of it is kind of far and few in between, whereas the just cannot move forward from are a lot more prevalent in the show. Ironically, I feel like these characters, every time I do this, have gotten harder and harder to like nailed down in their character, because one of the beautiful things about Gilmore Girls and the writing of the show is that it's so intricate and there's so much that you can pull from it, and we're able to kind of plug in some holes that aren't there, but then other things are specifically said. So Emily's a very, very complex character. Emily as a grandmother. Now, while Lorelai rejects the world that Emily fought so hard to be a part of, Rory doesn't have the same experience, and it's easy to see, especially at the beginning of the show, Emily and Richard don't really know Rory, they don't really understand Rory, but you can watch as the show goes on that they have a connection with her that they don't have with Lorelai. Now, that's pretty hard to say, especially because Lorelai is their daughter, but a lot of the things that Lorelai chooses to not do and to kind of almost like rebel against, Rory is very willing and happy to walk into. And I do think a lot of that reasoning is because Lorelai allows for that. She doesn't push her into going to an Ivy League school. She doesn't keep her from going to an Ivy League school. And again, we discussed that in the Rory video, how Rory is very appreciative of Lorelai doing that. I think if we were being really honest, I think Emily and Richard are also pretty appreciative of Lorelai doing that, because it allows them to connect with their granddaughter in a way that I don't think they would have been able to otherwise. Now, again, as I said at the beginning, they're pretty clunky with it and not really sure how to connect with her, but actually towards the beginning of the series is one of my favorite Emily and Rory moments, where they're discussing history and background, and Rory's learning a little bit about them and about her mother's childhood, and Emily makes a very, very specific moment important to Rory and important to Emily to say that Rory is not a disappointment, not her as a being, not her here, not her in any way. And I think that is one of the most pivotal moments that is able to create the relationship with Rory and Emily, whereas Lorelai makes jokes about being like a disappointment to her parents, Rory does not have that same feeling towards them. Now, again, because Emily is pretty hot and cold with a lot of things, and in my opinion is Enneagram 1, which is very black and white with decisions and with what should and shouldn't be, it's interesting to see how Emily takes a much different approach to Rory versus Lorelai. Now, mainly what I mean by that is when Rory starts kind of, I guess, like going off the rails, and she leaves school and she's making these decisions that obviously Emily wouldn't want for her to make, she gives Rory a lot more grace than she gave Lorelai. And I do think that's one of the reasons that Rory never really disconnected from her grandparents like Lorelai did. Now, there is a part of the series where Rory does disconnect with them for a little bit, but obviously it's easy to see it's not to the length that Lorelai did. And I would say a big reason for that is because Emily sees Rory as a second chance. She sees her as another person that can join the DAR, that she can give opportunities to, and also when she's giving these opportunities to Rory, Rory's willingly walking into them, whereas you can kind of tell from her opinion when she gave opportunities to Lorelai, Lorelai didn't want them. Rory chooses to have the coming out, Rory chooses to join the DAR, Rory chooses even to go to the same college as her grandfather, which again is carrying on that Gilmore name that Lorelai does in her own way, and I do appreciate that reconnection that she has with her parents when you can tell they're proud of what she's done with the Independence Inn and with the Dragonfly. But Rory is very willing to follow that, I guess, like a Gilmore path. And I think a really good example of that is when Rory does go to meet the Huntsbergers and she says, "Do they know I'm a Gilmore?" Whereas to her, that name carried so much weight, she was shocked by the fact that they didn't think the same as she did. Whereas Lorelai, I don't remember a part of the series where she had that same, I guess, weight around Gilmore. I think she truly loves Lorelai as the name because obviously she gives it to her daughter and she has it above her as well, whereas that like reigning Lorelai, I guess, effect. But I don't think Gilmore has the weight of the like hierarchy, almost maybe is the way to say that Rory believes that it does, if that makes sense. Another thing that I will say about Emily and Rory's connection is you can tell that Emily tries very hard to get into Rory's world, but also Rory, because of her different personality than her mother, is willing to, I guess, kind of like play along, I guess, if that makes sense, whereas Lorelai was very headstrong and not willing to go along with, like, say, the Lorelai drink, whereas Rory is okay with it and just kind of smiles and waves waves at certain points, and that's not really in Lorelai's character to do that. And lastly, what I will say about Emily as a grandmother is that you can tell that she truly, truly does love Rory. She has her kind of like as the apple of her eye in a lot of ways, very similarly to what Richard has as Rory, as the apple of his eye. And I think that's just a very sweet and lovely thing that they really do want the best for this girl, and they want to open up as many doors as they can to allow her to walk through them. Emily Gilmore in the DAR / Emily Gilmore as a boss. These two aspects of Emily when it comes to organization and planning and details very much so align with her being an Enneagram 1, which is somebody who, again, is very detail oriented, who sees things very black and white, who sees things very right and wrong, and if something's not done correctly, if she's in an unhealthy state, which unfortunately we see Emily quite a bit in the show, it is not a pretty sight. The main display of that comes when something is not done to perfection in the Gilmore household, like walnuts in the salad, or like something potentially misplaced, or many of the other factors that Emily points out throughout the series. Now again, like Emily's perfectionist side comes to the staff that she has, it also comes to the fact that she is in the DAR, and when she plans something, I can only imagine the amount of detail that goes into that, which from a guest perspective actually probably leads to a really fun party because you're thought of, everything's taken care of, there is the staffing that needs to be at the event, and every detail is in place. Now this does change throughout time, and we see in the reboot that the DAR to Emily does not have what it used to have, mainly meaning that this was her circle of friends, this was her social circle, but then it kind of becomes hollow to her. Now we will discuss certain aspects of that in a minute, but I think it is important to mention that Emily in the series saw great value in being in the DAR. Not only again for the Gilmore name, but also just for her immediate family. They got to go to events, they got to be connected with people, they got to know people in their community and be part of something that was bigger than themselves. That same larger than life, bigger than yourself aspect could have been so beautiful to see Emily as a boss if we had seen her in the original series care for people that worked for her, but unfortunately, I don't think we really saw that. Emily didn't even learn the name of many of the maids that came in and out of the household throughout the series, which Lorelai points out 1 or 2 times where she knows the name, or Rory's talking to somebody while polishing silver, but Emily doesn't like that interaction at all. Now, this is corrected by Emily in the reboot in a really kind of funny way, but I think it is important to mention the fact that there was such an opportunity for Emily to impact so many people's lives that worked for her, because when we look at that house and the gardeners and everything, there is just so much there that she could have done that she missed the opportunity. And that leads us to the last aspect of Emily that we'll be discussing in this character analysis, which is Emily in the reboot. Personally, this is my favorite character in the reboot and the one that I feel like has made the most progress. While it is very sad and honestly heartbreaking to not have Edward there, 1, did I cry? Absolutely I did. But 2, I appreciate what they did with Emily. For me, the reboot was pretty much the story of Emily and seeing her go from somebody that was a lot colder to somebody that realized what did and didn't matter. We see Emily doing KonMari and figuring out what does and doesn't bring her joy anymore. That to me was a little funny moment, which also I appreciate because again, in the time period of 2016, weren't we all like folding our clothes differently? Like, let's just be honest. But seeing her find herself and find, I guess, almost like a new purpose moving forward, and a family and people that were helping her that she really does care about now and that she's gonna have with her. I guess not like recreating her family because she does still have Lorelai and Rory, and also I appreciate in the reboot, I apparently appreciated a lot of things. I don't know, I keep saying that word, but the fact that Lorelai and Emily have the scene that they do where Lorelai can't think of something from her father and can't think of something, and honestly, in my opinion, like really did not do that well at the funeral. The fact that they give them the closure of that is beautiful. For Emily moving forward, I hope that she becomes a softer person, even though she talks about like, and then he jabs this and does that, like when she's in the Whaling Museum, which again, in my opinion, was just funny and just shows that she is still pretty intense of a person. But I hope that the experiences that she's gone through, and really truly like selling that house is a big deal. Like moving to another place is a big deal. We see, she talks about like her clothes not bringing her joy. Like she changes the way that she dresses, which is a big deal. One of the funniest moments is her in that DAR room when the new wife is sitting in front of them. That made me laugh so hard because again, to her, you know what, that doesn't matter anymore. It's not what it used to be. It doesn't bring her what it used to. It doesn't bring the fulfillment that she used to get from that. And I think it's okay for her to change, that it shows us that no matter what age you are, you can change your area. You could change your life. You can make different decisions. You can take a situation and work from it and plant your foot and then step forward. That is probably, those 4 episodes / basically movies are my favorite part of Emily that we see. Thank you so much for allowing me to kind of verbally process through this. I hope that you leave a comment down below. I would love to see what your thoughts are on Emily as a character overall, or if you have specific thoughts on one of the 5 aspects that I discussed in this video. She's an interesting character, and I think there's a lot to be said that I haven't said already, and a lot to work through. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. This is gonna be so confusing. Ugh. Okay, I can do this.